Good morning, children. Welcome to the online classes. Today we are going to learn chapter 9 of your syllabus, weathering. Yes, earlier classes we have learned about landforms, earthquakes, volcanoes. Hope, children, you remember these topics. And I also hope that you are taking down the notes, you are solving the worksheets. Earthquake lesson recording was sent to you. Hope you have followed the lesson. We are going to send you the notes also. Copy the notes properly in your classworks and solve the worksheets in your homework copies. So the next topic of your syllabus is weathering. Before explaining to you about the topic weathering, let me revise what are these constructive forces, what are these exogenic forces, and how they act or how they are these forces operate on the surface of the earth. Children, these internal forces operating in the interior of the earth are described as the constructive forces. They lead to the formation of landforms on the surface of the earth. Some forces are also operate on the surface of the earth. They are known as exogenic forces, which are the external forces, and these go through several processes such as weathering, mass wasting, erosion, transportation, deposition, and formation of soils. Children, these forces derive their energy from the sun. In all these cases, climate acts as a driving agent. So, as already we have learnt about the endogenic and the exogenic forces. So, these forces are described as the internal forces and the external forces, and they work as a constructive forces. And these forces on the earth go through the several processes such as weathering, wasting, erosion, transportation, deposition, and formation of the soils, and so on. Okay, then moving to the topic. In this topic weathering, you are going to learn what is weathering, types of weathering, and the effects of weathering. Okay, so let us learn first about weathering. What is weathering? There is a difference between the weather and the weathering. Children, yes, weather and climate and weathering. These two are completely different. Weathering is completely different. Weather is completely different. Okay, so first let me explain to you what is weathering. Weathering is nothing but it is described as a disintegration. It is nothing but it is described as the disintegration or decomposition of rock in size by natural agents at or near the surface of the earth. It is nothing but the disintegration of a or decomposition of a rock in size by natural agents. Natural agents. What are natural agents? Like wind, water, all these are the natural agents at or near the surface of the earth. It is nothing but weathering is a static process. It is a static process, and it is nothing but the process of breaking down of rocks, but not its removal. It is a process of breaking down the rock, but not its removal. Weathering cannot take place on the moon surface where such conditions do not exist. They exist only on the surface of the earth. And children, this disintegration or decomposition of rocks takes place uh, only by being exposed to the weather conditions like temperature, moisture, precipitation that disintegrate or break down the rocks. Okay, children. Then this weathering is the basic process and an essential phase of denudation, and it is an essential process of denudation. You know what is disintegration, children? No? Yeah, disintegration is nothing but breaking down of rocks into fragments or small particles or loose rock materials. Breaking down of rocks into fragments and loose particles is called as disintegration. And what is decomposition? Yes, the decomposition is nothing but it's a decay of rocks due to chemical changes. It's called as decomposition. So, disintegration and decomposition of the rocks by size in the natural agents is known as weathering. So, as already I have explained to you what is disintegration, it is nothing but breaking up of rocks into fragments and loose materials. Which type of materials? They are nothing but the loose rock materials. And decomposition is nothing but the decay of rocks due to chemical changes is called as decomposition. Okay, hope you are clear by the definition of weathering. So there are some factors. Children, there are some factors which affect or which influence weathering. Let me explain to you. One of the most important factor is weather conditions. There are changes in the weather conditions like temperature, atmospheric moisture, precipitation, etc. So many weather conditions. And one more important factor is the type of the rocks. It depends upon the types of the rocks. Earlier when we have learned about lesson rocks, we have learned different types of rocks, whether they are metamorphic rocks, sedimentary rocks, igneous rocks. It depends on the type of the rock. And then the type of vegetation cover, the type of the vegetation. What is vegetation? Vegetation is nothing but the plants, the plant cover. It depends on the region, every region. So vegetation differs from region to region. In an equatorial region, there is a different vegetation. In desert region, there is separate. In a deciduous, there is separate type of vegetation. We will learn about this vegetation in your upcoming classes. One of the lesson also is there in your syllabus, that is natural regions. There you will learn about the vegetation. So simply you need to know vegetation. Vegetation is nothing but the plant cover. Okay. Then one more factor which influence the weathering is the type of land or the slope of the land surface. It depends on the slope of the land surface. And then also the degree of exposure to the sun, wind and rain. Okay, the degree of exposure to the sun, wind and rain. So right now what I was explaining to you children, I have explained to you what is weathering. Weathering is nothing but disintegration or decomposition of the rock by natural agents. Natural agents are nothing but water, air, all these are the natural agents. And then you have the factors which influence weathering. One important factor is weather conditions. Second one is the types of rocks. And the third one is the type of vegetation cover. And then the slope of land and the degree of exposure to sun, wind and rain. Okay children? Oh, fine. Then moving forward, let me explain to you the chief characteristics of weathering. There are some important characteristics of weathering. So one by one let me explain to you the important characteristics of weathering. So one of the important characteristic of weathering is it is the disintegration or decay of solid rocks. It is nothing but weathering involves the disintegration or the decay of solid rocks. Disintegration or decay of solid rocks. And then the second one is the weathering depends on climatic elements also. They also depend on the climatic elements and its characteristics of the rocks. And for example, the rock's chemical composition, it depends on the texture, hardness, or determines the weathering pattern and so on. And one more characteristic is weathering affects the surface of the earth. It affects the surface of the earth, and it also causes formation of soil. And weathering involves not one but several processes to cause disintegration of rocks. Weathering changes hard massive rocks into finer materials also, and it also prepares rock materials for transportation by agents of gradation. It is agents of gradation. So the the important characteristics of weathering are the disintegration or decay of solid rocks, and it affects the surface of the earth, and it causes formation of soil, and it changes hard massive rocks into finer materials. Okay children? So now moving forward, let us learn about the types of weathering. There are different types of weathering. So as you have already understood what is weathering, what are the factors influencing weathering, and what are the chief characteristics of weathering. Now let us learn the types of weathering. The types of weathering are physical weathering, and it has so many subheadings also. Let me deal with each and every individual clearly. Then the second one is the chemical weathering, and the third one is the biological weathering. So children, let me explain to you the difference between the mechanical and the chemical weathering. there are some differences between the mechanical and the chemical weathering. Before explaining to you the differences, let me explain to you what is the physical weathering. Physical weathering is nothing but the disintegration of rocks by mechanical process. It is nothing but disintegration of rocks by the mechanical process is called as chemical or physical or mechanical weathering. Disintegration of rocks without any change in their chemical constituents. There is no chemical change at all in their chemical constituents is known as physical weathering. So children, what is physical weathering? It is also known as mechanical weathering also. It is nothing but it is the disintegration of rocks by mechanical process or the disintegration of rocks without any change in their chemical constituents is known as physical or mechanical weathering. And children, this physical weathering takes place mainly by changes in the temperature. These changes takes place only by changes in the temperature and the freezing action of water, etc. And children, there are some agents, there are some major agents or the factors which are responsible for the physical or mechanical weathering. They are nothing but, as earlier also we have discussed in the factors influencing weathering, that is temperature, moisture, wind, frost, and so on. Okay, so one of the most important agent or the factors responsible for this physical weathering is the temperature changes, the moisture, and so on. So children, these physical weathering, it affects by the block disintegration and the granular disintegration and the exfoliation. So you can have a look at the pictures also. What is the block disintegration, the granular disintegration, and the exfoliation? You can refer your textbook when you go through this. When you are listening to this video, you can open your textbooks and have a look at the pictures also, children. And this mechanics of the weathering, physical weathering, there is how the water freezes and expands in the cracks of the rocks and water collects in the rocks. That picture also you can have a look at from the textbook, that is figure 9.2. So now let us talk about the block disintegration. What is this block disintegration? The picture itself explains to you about this term as block disintegration. The sudden rise and fall of temperature causes expansion and contraction of rocks. Children, the sudden rise and fall of temperatures, causes expansion and contraction of rocks. The repeated action leads to the tension and splitting of rocks is known as block disintegration. You can have a look at the diagram also, the block disintegration, how it is caused. It is nothing but the sudden rise and fall of temperature causes expansion and contraction of rocks. This repeated action causes their breakdown. At night, the temperature suddenly falls and during the day it rises suddenly. This leads to tension and splitting of rocks known as block disintegration. Okay, children. Then comes the granular disintegration. Granular disintegration. How do we pronounce it? Granular disintegration. Children, this granular disintegration occurs due to the changes in temperature and frost action. And this occurs due to the changes in temperature and frost action. And what type of changes in temperature? Due to the heating or cooling, the mineral grains of a bedrock expand or contrast. Okay, children, these mineral grains of a bedrock expand or contrast at different rates. It causes the breaking of rock into pieces and fragments of grains. This is known as granular disintegration. And one more type is this exfoliation. What is this exfoliation? It is nothing but the sudden contraction and expansion peels off the outer layer of what? Outer layer of rocks, which is known as exfoliation. The peeling, the sudden temperature changes, children. Sometimes the sudden temperature changes also, they cause fissures into which water water penetrates, which in turn stimulates chemical weathering. Most rocks are not good conductors, but the sudden contraction or the peel off of the outer layer is known as exfoliation. So, one of the type of weathering is physical weathering. In this physical weathering, we have learnt about block disintegration, granular disintegration, and exfoliation. Children, try to understand. Look at the diagrams also to when I am explaining to you, and try to underline the terms which are important while listening to the class. So moving forward, let me explain to you about the chemical weathering. What is this chemical weathering? Okay, children. Chemical weathering is nothing but it is the decomposition of rocks due to chemical reaction. It is decomposition of rocks due to chemical reaction that transforms the chemical constituent of rocks, which is known as chemical weathering. Decomposition of rocks due to the chemical reaction that transforms the chemical constituent of rocks is known as chemical weathering. And children, there are some agents of chemical weathering. The agents of chemical weathering are water, carbon, and various organic acids. There are some four main processes involved in chemical weathering. One is oxidation, carbonation, hydration, and solution. Children, you need to learn about these terms. These are the processes which are involved in the chemical weathering. So let us deal with one by one of each of the process. First, what is oxidation? Oxidation is nothing but it is the reaction of minerals in rocks to atmospheric oxygen is known as oxidation. The reaction of minerals in rocks to atmospheric oxygen is known as oxidation. It means reaction of minerals in rocks to atmospheric oxygen. The rainwater, children, it contains atmospheric oxygen. On coming in contact with iron compounds in rocks, the iron starts rusting or crumbling. The color of the rock also changes to red, yellow, or brown. This is known as oxidation. The next one is the carbonation. Many mineral constituents, carbonation is nothing but it is the process of absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by minerals present in the rocks. Carbonation is nothing but it is a process of absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by minerals present in the rocks. Okay, children. Then this, in case of carbonation, rainwater converts calcium carbonate into calcium bicarbonate, which is soluble and is taken away by the groundwater. In this case of carbonation, the rainwater converts calcium carbonate into calcium bicarbonate, which is soluble and is taken away by the groundwater. Okay, now next let us learn about the hydration. Hydration is nothing but it is in this process of expansion of minerals, which some minerals in crystalline form absorb water and become a powdery mass. This crystalline form absorbs water and become a powdery mass. Okay, children, right? Then the examples like rocks like feldspar are converted into kaolin. This is just an example. You can make a note of it. Children, in this hydration, the minerals become heavy and start disintegrating. During this hydration, these minerals become heavy and start disintegrating. The next one is the solution. Solution is the process in which the rocks dissolve in water and seep below the ground through joints or cracks of rocks. In this process, the minerals in the rocks dissolve in water and seep below the ground through joints or cracks of rocks. For example, rainwater causes chemical disintegration of rocks like salt and gypsum. Children, these are the four processes. What are the four processes of chemical weathering? One is oxidation, which means reaction of minerals in rocks to atmospheric oxygen, and next one is carbonation. Like many mineral constituents of rocks such as carbon dioxide, while coming in contact with water, produce acidic effect on rocks. Then hydration. In this process, expansion of minerals occurs or coming into contact with rainwater. these minerals become heavy and start disintegrating also. And then the solution. Solution is nothing but it's a process in which minerals in the rocks dissolve in water, and they are subjected to solution to some extent. Okay, children. So now as we have learnt about the chemical weathering and the physical weathering and the chemical weathering, there are some differences between the physical and chemical weathering. There is a tabular form in your textbook also. You can go through this tabular form. Let me briefly explain to you the difference between the mechanical or the physical and the chemical weathering. So the disintegration of rocks takes place without any change in the chemical. In physical weathering, there is no chemical change at all. But whereas in chemical weathering, there is chemical changes in the chemical constituents are there in the rocks. And children, these factors like temperature, moisture, frost affects physical weathering. Temperature, moisture, etc. cause minerals in rocks to either dissolve in water or change their composition. And it is more rapid in desert climates. Physical weathering is more rapid in desert climate, but whereas the chemical weathering occurs in moist and cold climates. Rocks are affected to great depth. In physical weathering, rocks are affected to the great depth, but whereas in chemical weathering, mostly takes place near the surface of the earth. Mostly it takes place near the surface of the earth. Mechanical weathering or the physical weathering, its agents are temperature and moisture, but whereas chemical weathering, its agents are water, oxygen, carbon, and various organic acids. So these are the differences between the mechanical weathering and the chemical weathering. Children, this lesson you need to just go through once, read once, and when the notes is sent to you, you will understand it very clearly. Some important questions like a worksheet also we are going to prepare and send it to you. When you read those, that is enough for you all. Okay, but concentrate on the diagrams also, and especially the tabular form on page number 71, the difference between mechanical and the chemical weathering also you need to go through. Right, children? Now, next type of weathering is biological weathering. Biological weathering, the word itself says, biological weathering, it is also known as organic weathering. And the main agents of this biological weathering are animals, insects, plants, man, humans. Okay, in all these cases, however, both physical and the disintegration of the chemical composition are involved. But the biological matter is made up of oxygen and water, the two substances that set off reaction of minerals in the rocks. Children, this biological weathering which involves living organisms. Okay, biological weathering involves the living organisms, which is known as biological weathering. These main agents are the animals, insects, plants, etc. These both physical disintegration and chemical composition are involved in this biological weathering. Okay. Then how these animals and insects are affecting the biological weathering? For example, burrowing animals like rodents loosen the surface material, like worms, insects. They loosen the surface material of the earth, and the biological weathering is caused. Like dead animals provide many chemicals and acids for the rock disintegration also. Okay. Then how come the plants are affecting the biological weathering? They are one of the agent of the biological weathering. How they are as the agent of the biological weathering? Children, the long roots of the plants grow in between the rocks and cause physical weathering due to the pressure. You might have observed so many times. You might have observed the plants when they're in between the even in the houses also, if there is a gap in between the walls, when these birds, when they go, they drop wings and all. When they drop it from in between the cracks, also there is growth of the plants, and which causes the physical weathering. And not only that, the long roots of the plants grow in between the rocks and cause physical weathering. Okay, children. Then one of the agent for this biological weathering is man. Man also is one of the agent for the biological weathering. Man is the most active agent of the both physical and chemical weathering of rocks. For example, mining, excavations, etc. cause physical weathering. and this agricultural dumping of chemicals etc. cause both physical and chemical weathering. Okay children, so there are three types of weathering, that is physical weathering, chemical weathering and biological weathering. Children, hope you might have followed the lesson. Of course, the terms are very new to you, but once you listen to the video and the audio and then you go through the lesson, and after that when you receive the notes, if you write down the notes, then it is clear to you all. Okay children, now let me briefly revise to you what is weathering. Weathering is nothing but the disintegration or decomposition of a rock in size by natural agents at or near the surface of the earth. And the chief characteristics of weathering are disintegration or decay of solid rocks affects the surface of the earth and causes formation of soil and changes hard massive rocks into finer materials. And the types of weathering are physical weathering, under that you have block disintegration, granular disintegration and exfoliation. Then the chemical weathering, the processes involved are oxidation, it's nothing but a reaction of minerals in rocks to atmospheric oxygen. And then carbonation, it's nothing but many mineral constituents of rocks such as carbon dioxide while coming in contact with water produce acidic effect on the rock. Then hydration, it is the process expansion of minerals occurs on coming into contact with rainwater. It is nothing but the process of expansion of minerals. Then solution, it is also a process in which minerals in the rocks dissolve in water. And then the third type of weathering is biological weathering, and the most important agents of biological weathering are animals and insects, humans, plants, etc. Okay children, hope you might have followed this topic. Then the topic weathering, which is chapter 9 for you, and then the notes will be sent to you children. You can take down the notes and the worksheets can be solved in your homework copies. Okay.